Hello, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast, in which we have conversations about the culture we create and the impact we can make. I'm your host, Joshua Johnson. In this episode, Rich Robinson shares about kingdom movements, being rooted and grounded in our relationship with Jesus, and how to be good news to the culture around us. Rich is the team leader for Catalyze Change, which provides training and coaching for church leaders, network leaders, and entrepreneurs. I know you're going to enjoy this interview. I know I did. So let's get to it. All right. Welcome, Rich, and welcome to the Shifting Culture podcast. How's it going?
Yeah, doing well. Thanks for having me. Looking forward to it, Joshua.
Yeah, I'm really excited about this conversation. When I'm looking at you and where you fit right now, it seems like you're all over the map when it comes to entrepreneurial ideas, working with Movement Leaders Collective, with CREO, doing a lot of different things with Christian leaders around the world. How did you start to get into really movement dynamics, organizational change, leadership? Where did this come from?
Yeah, great question. Really, I became a Christian in the midst of a very dynamic environment. So it was a local church in a city in England, but it was really far more a missions base, a training school. So less than 1% church attendance in the city. So it really was a kind of build it and they will come, they'll never come. So I became a Christian really with this dynamic of open the Bible around the table over food with non-Christians. It was more incarnational rather than attendance. Had some wonderful mentors and leaders. And so really my schooling and my sort of formation in my 20s was in an environment where those dynamics of entrepreneurship, innovation, movements, that the fivefold ministry, discipleship, leadership were really present. So in one sense, my formation was in that world. And then also it's probably just the way that I'm wired. So yeah. I would be apostolic in the fivefold, more Pauline. So it's frontiers, it's drive forward, it's innovation. I love to experiment, love to be on those fuzzy edges and sort of prototyping things and making them and breaking them and piecing them together again and just learning and then being able to pass that learning on to others. So it's probably a combination of a little bit of nature and a little bit of nurture in me that puts me in this place right now.
We often, disciple others the way that we were discipled. And so it often flows that way. And so, in my line of work, what I'm trying to do is to get people into a different paradigm of the discipleship that they've been through growing up in a church environment. And you actually had something that was relatively easy for you to keep going and pursuing innovation, kingdom expansion. How do you get to a place where now that you're working with Christian leaders to, instead of having them be discipling others in the way that they were discipled, how do you get people to start to think innovatively when it comes to kingdom work?
I think probably there's many different answers to that question, many different ways to come about it. I think one is that they have to have a God moment. So it cannot be the latest fad or an organizational edict or an insecurity or a drive or a charisma for something different. It has to be God ordained, God infused. And so there really is that moment of revelation or repentance where we receive truth and turn away from what was and turn towards what is. So I think that the mystery of being a Christian is we can't put God in a box. There's no system. So we have the blueprint of scripture, we have the empowering of the Holy Spirit, but actually we have to look for where God's at work. So one answer is, how do you position those leaders as best you can for them to encounter God is probably point number one. The other way is that often it's actually that we act our way into a new way of thinking. So the danger is if it's just trying to get our head around concepts, it's sort of, yes, I understand that, Joshua. Yes, I understand that. Yeah. But actually, we're just taking the idea and filtering it through an old paradigm, which often means we come up with old conclusions.
Right. Yep.
And we actually need to almost disrupt ourselves with our behavior. And so often when I'm helping people to experience something different, as well as imagine something different, that the experience comes before imagination. So and you see that in the Gospels. Often Jesus is explaining to the disciples what just happened, rather than front loading them with information and saying it's going to look like this, and then you're going to do this, and it's going to be blah, blah. So I think probably the other way of helping people to live into a new paradigm is actually practice their way into it. So we just say, where is there a simple experiment or a pilot? Where is there one practice? Where is there a place where you can begin to explore and feel your way into this? And then it's reflective learning as you take intentional practice moving forward.
Yeah, I think that's huge. And it's something that we're not very good at. We often think that, hey, life with Jesus is an intellectual game. And it's not just an intellectual game. We have to do that practice and do the work. And things that we're going to discover, the truth of who Jesus is, the truth of what God does in this world, is often going to hit us, the place. That's where we're going to have our God moments. It's often in the little things of life, in the mundane of life, where God impacts us and reaches us and touches us and speaks to us. But we're not often looking for that. And so I think, what we need to do is figure out, how do we live in a space where we're living on mission, and not just living with a intellectual thought of who God is. So it's the practice. And I know that you try and live on mission with your family, and not just individually, but all together. What does that look like as a family, to live on mission, to practice this, and to get out into the world?
Yeah, great question, Joshua, because you're absolutely right. We've made discipleship far more a 21st century educational pursuit.
Yep.
Rather than a first century experiential. It really is an experience rather than just an educational process. And so we've tried to do that with our kids. I mean, nobody's perfect. We're not perfect parents. We're not the model and the only model. But what we found very early on, and again, being discipled, mentored by others, was if we want our kids to pray, we can tell them about prayer. We can help them to understand conceptually and intellectually what prayer is. We can buy them a prayer coloring book or an app or whatever, or send them to the youth team to tell them how to pray. But actually, they're going to pray if they see mum and dad pray, and they pray with mum and dad. So it's immersion and it's experience. Yep. And it's the education coming through apprenticeship rather than just through the sort of classroom or the concept. So we would try and have, as we say, we have rhythms of prayer. So we're able to connect, and prayer is really then the fuel for mission. You can't do mission without prayer, and you can't do prayer without mission. They're intertwined and connected. So we would have rhythms of prayer. We would then have rhythms of community. And so obviously they've been slightly disrupted with global pandemics, and what was sort of hospitality, people in our home, has now become walks on the beach or campfires or sort of socially distanced this and that. So obviously the last 12 months has been hugely challenging, but then you have to pivot and innovate. So there's rhythms of community, and that's both community with Christians, but also community that then we're able to invite those that don't know Jesus into. So it's not just into our nuclear family, but it's into our extended family. And so we have another family that live in our local neighborhood that we try and connect with each other's people of peace, serve each other's neighborhoods. They live in a slightly different part of our neighborhood. And then what we're trying to do is to seek to be good news in our community. And so we say, where are we good news where there's bad news? So we live in this little seaside sort of part of a capital city. So Edinburgh is capital city, but we live just the other side off on the coast. And so it's this sort of funny mix of very middle class, very poor, kind of bohemian spiritual kind of thing. And so lots of people come. Everyone has a dog who lives in Portobello, and people that come just leave litter. So what's bad news? What's bad news in Portobello? Dog poo and litter. So as again, some of the things we've
Nice.
said, we've done beach cleans, we've done street cleans, because that's good news. And it's not
Hmm.
us as Christians serving everyone like Christian social services, but it's actually, we put it on the community Facebook, and the community can join us to do the clear up. So it's some practical things like that. It's being good news to people of peace. So that might be sharing lifts, that might be sharing coffee, that might be sharing the ups and downs of whatever in life. So
Yeah.
it's looking for those opportunities, and then it's finding places where it's authentic. So it's not just trying to get them to an event, but it's
Yep.
trying to find experiences that are authentic. And so that looks different for us in our local neighborhood than it does in other
Yeah.
cities, other countries, other cultures. So
Yeah.
there's no formula or kind of to-do list. It's far more, this is a principle. How does this look contextualized as a practice?
Yeah. I think that's so important for any family or any person, is to learn to live on purpose. And when I think when people grow up in a place where they have a purpose, they have something that's greater than themselves or greater than their nuclear family, they're going to be transformed by that purpose. And so I think we have to live on purpose. What does that look like to live on purpose? There's a couple things that you've said, as you're walking with your family, as you're working with Christian leaders, you you said, we have to see what God is doing in a place. And then you also said we have to see what is good news for this area. And so as we enter into a community or a culture, what are some steps to see what God is doing, to see what is good news for the people that we are encountering?
Yeah, well, in the UK, there was a historic government campaign to teach children how to cross the road, and it was called the Green Cross Code. And so what it was you had this little strap line which said you stop, look, and listen.
Mm-hmm.
And so when you cross the road, you walk to the edge of the road and stop on the pavement, the sidewalk. You listen for any traffic, and then you look both ways. And if you stop, look, and listen, then you can cross the road safely. And that was the mantra for little kids and kind of public service broadcasts
Yeah.
and parents and all that kind of stuff. But I often say that's the best way to engage a community. Often we approach a community as Christians with a head down, run, hope
Yep.
we don't get hit by a truck and make it to the other side and kind of disappear and bump our way into the community, actually, rather than just stop. So actually look and listen before you speak and offer. So we're often offering solutions to problems that aren't there, or offering answers to
Right.
questions that aren't being asked. So stop, look, and listen is actually look around. Where are the places of gathering, the places of pain? What do people
Mm.
celebrate? What do they complain about? Look and see and observe and listen. So how do you find out what bad news is, good news is? You ask, like, what sucks? What would you change? What do you not like? What do you love? Just ask questions. So learn the culture, learn the context by asking, dialoguing, and just beginning to build a mosaic. And then you're able to say, well, actually, this is where I see God at work, or this is where I see a place of pain or deficit,
Mm.
or this is something that's a celebration or a connection point that I can partner with and be part of. So yeah, we sort of know our community. There's a sort of a value on the outdoors, a value on family, but also a pain point around family. There's a lot of divorce and pain within the families in our neighborhood. There's lots of dog poo, lots of litter. There's battle over local green space. There's lots of different things. It's very spiritual. So you can kind of learn to write poetry, ride a unicycle, or do Reiki healing, and anywhere and everything in between. So you just have to know your community first. So I think stop, look, and listen is probably the mantra that I have, that
That's good.
then you know how to cross the road in a more authentic way.
That's really good. We often forget to shut up and ask questions and listen, right? And so,
Yeah.
I mean, we're really bad at it. And it's a skill that we have to learn. It's something that we have to get into a practice of. And how do we get better at the skill of listening, asking questions?
that's very good. And probably that goes back, Joshua, to the one of the first questions you asked of how do you help people change
Yeah.
when you're trying to help them to do something or live something or be something different. I think the muscle memory of Christendom and the centrality of the church and the significance of the church, and it's so deep within
Mm-hmm.
us, and
Yeah.
we chart history and years by the birth of Jesus. It's AD and BC, so Jesus is the focal point for history.
Yep.
But yet right now he is not the axis of culture within the context that we find ourselves in. And obviously you're in a North American context, I'm in a European context, and we both have a global relational network, so we know the different dynamics of different parts of the world. And so I think understanding that our muscle memory is so deep to feel as though we are in charge, or to feel like we have something of such value that we want to give it to people.
Right. Yeah.
But actually the way that we interact and the way that we can give can actually neuter the message rather
Mm-hmm.
than open people to the message. So how do we get better? We pray and we practice is often very simplistically. We say, Jesus, help me with this, because you can't do it in your own strength. And then you just practice. And so actually, if you're part of a church or a church plant or a team or a community, practice on each other. Then if there's a bit of friendly fire, you've not lost anything. So if you're actually able to say, well, let's for a couple of weeks just practice listening to each other, practice asking questions, and so grow that muscle memory and those reps.
Yeah.
Because what I talk about is you move from a discipline to a habit to a lifestyle. So a discipline is intentionally doing the right thing. So
Yep.
I'm intentionally going to ask questions. So that might be as simple as I talk a lot. You know that I talk a lot, Joshua. When I'm trying to discipline myself to allow space for others to lead, and it may be a team member that I know needs to lead the meeting, I have imaginary in my head 3 chips, and I get to say 3 things in the meeting. I get to put my 3 chips on the table. And so the discipline for me is
That's good.
keep your mouth shut, and you get to say 3 things, because I need that. So there's a discipline intentionally.
Yep.
Then it becomes a habit. So we usually, most of the time, our instinct isn't fully there, and it's not subconscious, but we're most of the time we do a good job. And it finally arcs towards natural. It finally arcs, becomes a lifestyle. So I'm naturally curious, inquisitive. I naturally question before I answer. I naturally listen and seek to understand before I seek to be understood. So it comes. We'd all love to run a marathon, but it starts with going for a jog. Like we'd all run. We'd all love to do this and this, but actually it has to start with discipline, and that discipline is rooted in prayer and rooted in intention. So living on purpose and living with a purpose was what you said. I totally agree.
Now, I'm really interested. I got my master's in social entrepreneurship. It's really a passion to see what does it look like for Christians to go into a community with a business, a social good, a social organization, and create some holistic change. What are the steps? What are the things that you do in that space?
Yeah, well, Creo is one of the initiatives of our charity Catalyze Change. And so, as you said, there's different hats that I wear. One of them is Creo. So the heart and the hope that we have as a charity, really the overarching and undergirding call I have is to release kingdom potential in leaders.
Mm-hmm.
And that sense of releasing kingdom potential in leaders is for the good of others. It's to advance the common good. It's to bring social, systemic, spiritual change. It's to really see the kingdom embodied and extended. It's not release potential in leaders to build a bigger platform or a bigger following or a better bottom line or whatever. So Creo is there to connect, resource, and train Christian entrepreneurs to advance the common good. So similar language, we talk about social, strategic, and spiritual change. And the strategic we into kind of mingle with systemic. So I sometimes I'll say systemic change because we actually want the whole system to shift and we want it to be generational. Sometimes it's strategic change, which is actually bringing about a change that does shift a system. But that's the deal. In that space, Joshua, what we're seeking to do is to help connect people's passion with the world's problems. And so there often is that fuzzy edge of, should I plant a church? Should I start a business? Should I lead a charity? And there's the entrepreneurial drive and mark that people have. Yeah. They often pick a lane, and it's sort of, I'm entrepreneurial, I'll plant a church, or I'm entrepreneurial, I'll start a business, or I'm entrepreneurial, I'll start a charity, a 501c3, a social enterprise. And I think what I've observed is that the coming generation, the sort of under 30s, don't like lanes, don't have boxes. There's an integrated worldview of Sunday and Monday are they're 2 days of the week, rather than one is more important than the other. And actually, it's just as important as what I do with my relationships, as my resources.
So good.
Is it a church? Is it a business? Is it both? It looks a bit like, and so it's that sense of, well, is it a church plant or a non-profit? And so there's a sense of these boxes beginning to be sort of taken down, blurred edges moving forward. And so what we're trying to do is to say, if you're running a business, how does it feel and how does it have the echoes and ethos of a charity? And if you're running a charity, how does it have the sharpness and the caliber of a business? And actually, how do you blur the lines between spiritual, social, and strategic?
Yeah, you talked a little bit about strategic change, systemic change. Oftentimes we go and we see a problem and we go down to the problem and try to change something. And that's not where we want to start. If we want to see strategic or systemic change, we want to go upstream to the original spot where the problem originates. How do we see that and tackle those problems in an upstream place and not where you see the problem?
Yeah, good question, Joshua. Toyota have a 5-question policy, so they continue to ask the why question, to dig down why.
And all 5 of their questions, why.
So where you kind of if so, that's it. Because what they'll do is they'll say, if something's broken on the production line, it's what's going on. And then but actually, why has that happened? So it really is the kind of going upstream, the more you drill down in those questions. And I do think, Joshua, a lot of it is about questions. So we see a problem and we want to fix it, but actually, absolutely, it might be we need to create a breakfast club for kids that aren't being fed. Absolutely, that is a need to be met. But then going deeper than that to think through family and education and government funding and the church's engagement and all of these different things that actually build a bigger, better picture of actually this, if we help here or we work out how to empower here, it helps there. And so it
helps all the way down the line.
Absolutely. And so, and one of the pieces that we always talk about is, what is an empowering solution rather than a quick fix. So often we will step in and fix something, and in the short term it's better, but actually we've not empowered the people involved, or we've not shifted the system to empower the people involved. And so absolutely in Creo, what we're wanting to do is to not just help Christian entrepreneurs build a product or deliver a service, but we're actually helping them to think through their values. We do a whole module, a whole week in our 9-week accelerator, and a whole month in our 9-month lab around imagination and innovation, to actually say, beyond just the impact you want to make, how do you dream a 3 to 5 year picture of the future that's beyond just, I've launched this, I've scaled this, I've started this, I've made a difference here. So definitely, I think thinking through the mystery. Another frame that we use is the Psalm 23, valley of the shadow of death, the greener pasture. So actually, rather than just how do we survive the valley, It's what do we do and how do we dream the greener pasture? What does 3 to 5 years down the line really look like that gives us a North Star to actually work for? And then if you think 5 years from now, it's not just we fixed one problem in the next 6 months. It's far, far bigger than that.
Yeah, it's huge. And it gives us hope in the middle of the valley. I think a lot of people give up in the messy middle.
Yes,
And they're like,
definitely.
it's too hard. I don't see the promised land on the other side. I don't see
Yep.
where I came from. I'm just stuck right here in the
Yeah.
middle. I'm looking around what's happening. And so that says how we're actually going for it. How do you help people in the messy middle to continue to walk it out and have hope that there is going to be change on the other end?
Yeah, you have to continue to have some sense of future. So the future and the vision of the greener pasture has to be worth the valley. The promise of the promised land
Yeah.
needs to be worth the travail in the desert. So number one is helping people to remember why they got into this in the first place. So the cucumbers of Egypt look awfully awfully good rather than the
Right.
mythical milk and honey of the promised land. So
Yeah.
it's far easier to go back. So remembering the journey is worth it because of the vision and the destination, the North Star. So the first one is help people to remember the why, which
Yep.
is that vision. The second is that we are braver together. So it
Mm.
is almost impossible to survive individually.
Yep.
So trying to kind of pick yourself up, dust yourself down, G yourself up, keep yourself going, keep is almost impossible. So who's your tribe? Who are your people? Who's your 3 and your 12 in terms of core team? Who's praying for you? Who's encouraging
Mm.
you? Who picks you up and kicks you as well as cheers you on? So the
Mm.
who's with you is important. And
That's an American myth of the solo entrepreneur, right? I just
yes. Oh, yes. Myth doesn't do it justice. I would probably have slightly harsher language for it, Joshua, that I couldn't share publicly. Yeah, I honestly think. So obviously the parable of the 4 soils is a very well
yeah.
known parable, but the story that is told just after that of the farmer that sows the seed,
Mm.
the enemy comes at night, and then the crop grows and the weeds are so close to the
Yeah.
crop that the servants say, should we just pull everything out? He says, no, you can't pull everything out. There's this
Mm.
weed that's the counterfeit, and at
Yeah.
the right time you pull it away. And I often say that when God sows a seed, the enemy sows a counterfeit.
Yeah.
And so that for me, the solo heroic entrepreneur is one of the counterfeit seeds, because we are called to greatness, we are
Yep.
called to a hero's journey, but the journey is in community and
Mm.
for the good of the community.
Yeah.
It isn't on our own for our benefit. And so this sort of just counterfeit on the side will just drift us
That's
away, and
good.
we just lose it. So we do need to continue to dare greatly and courageously attempt wonderful things for God, but it's with others and for the good of others, not
Mm.
for our own acclaim and our own platform. So yeah, I do think that second space of with others and for the good of others is vital. And then the third thing, Joshua, is just I always say stick to the plan. Like you do the last thing that God told you to do until you hear differently, and
Yeah.
it really is that sense of one, like the saying is one foot in front of the other. So you kind of look up, know where the North Star is, and then look down and just take the next step. So sometimes the most courageous thing you can do is just take one next step. Again, one of the myths is of that charismatic
Right.
visionary who always has the right answers and always
Yeah.
knows it's going to work, and actually often the people who shaped history, if you found them in the moment, they would go, I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know the impact, but I'm just being faithful. I know what I'm doing. And often history charts them as we look back as great heroes and high points. But often those people in the midst of it, it
They
doesn't
don't know
feel
it.
like a high point when
They don't
you're in
know
the
it.
midst of it. Nope.
Yeah. They don't know it at all. And faithfulness. Yeah. Just yesterday, I was contemplating, and I was trying to appreciate my wife. It was her birthday, and while I was thinking about what I love about my wife is that she is faithful to put one step in front of the other
Yes.
in the darkness and the difficulty and the place where she doesn't feel like it's worth it, like, but she's going to put one step in front of the other, and she's faithful, and people see that faithfulness. She often doesn't see it,
Yeah.
and she doesn't see the impact that she's having, but we all need to have that faithful one step in front of the other, and if we're going to do that, we could really change the world. It's not just this hyperbole
Yeah.
that, if we get into this space, everything's gonna be good. Oftentimes in my line of work, as in missions, missionaries go out and think, hey, we're gonna change the world, and they have that high as they start, and then it's quickly into the valley, and
Yes.
they are just lost. And so this is really helpful to walk people through what
Yeah.
does it look like to stay within the valley and go into the other side, which is greener pastures. And as we're in that messy middle, you talked a little bit about an integrated space, integrated community. What is the interplay between faith and social entrepreneurship work, business, civic duty, government? What is the interplay of all of this? Because I think we all need to press forward so we could see systemic change.
Yeah, and this would be my opinion and my worldview, Joshua. Different people would express it very differently. Um, I think for me, if the gospel isn't good news to every strata of society and
Yep.
every nook and cranny of our city, then for me it's not the fullness of the gospel. And if
Yeah.
Jesus if
Yeah.
Jesus
That's
isn't
right.
good if Jesus isn't good news to anyone and everyone in our city, then we've missed something of who Jesus is. And so from my perspective, there's no sacred secular divide or
Yep.
church and marketplace or individual or communal. We are called to be a peacemaking presence. We're called to bring and shift spiritual transformation and shift the spiritual temperature. We're called to bring social change to the forgotten, the last, the least, the lost, the alien, the widow, the orphan. And so from my perspective, we're all called to have that worldview, that
Yep.
holistic worldview of Jesus at the center, like re-Jesusing our cities.
Yep.
But actually, each of us in Ephesians, each of us plays our part. So we're not all called to live and function and have influence in every part of our city.
Right.
We need to find our plots, our place to farm, our place to sow seeds, to water, to pray for God's growth in that space. And so that might be the school gates, it might be an office,
Yep.
it might be a local government position, it may be as a church planter, it may be as a coach for a local football team. Like there's numerous different ways that we can be good news within the strata and within the culture of our society and our city. And so it's having the worldview
Yeah.
of spiritual and social transformation, and then finding our part to play within it.
Wow. Yeah, I think that's good. And that goes back to the need for community, the need to do it with others and not just, hey, look at what I'm doing. I'm really good. This is great. But we have to see this holistic change in communities, and it's through community. It's through a communal experience. I mean, we're meant to be part of the body of Christ,
Yeah.
and not just an individual part of that body. I'm just a sliver on the pinky, but I need everybody else, and then we could be pretty dynamic as
Yeah.
a community. As something I've been trying to work out is what kingdom movements really look like. So what do they look like on the ground? Can you give me some examples of really cool kingdom movements that you've seen?
Yeah, I would say there's a couple of ways that I would mark movement. So one of the ways is we use the MDNA written
Mm-hmm.
by Alan Hirsch in The Forgotten Ways. And so these different elements. So Jesus is Lord. So a
Yeah.
kingdom movement has Jesus at the center, discipleship and disciple making. It has the energy and the ethos of discipleship and disciple making, missional incarnational impulse. So a kingdom movement is going out to the edges, to the
Yep.
lost, to the last, the least, and actually staying, not attracting back or transactioning, but actually incarnational. APES, there's a full mobilization of the people of God. It's not professionalized or a few doing work of the many. It's
Yep.
everyone involved. Organic systems, so it's simple, scalable, reproducible, and self-replicating. And then liminality, communitas, that sense of risk and displacement, and really a camaraderie, not just a social club kind of feel. And so that's one of the marks of kingdom movement we would talk about. The other is really that there's a shared purpose and shared values and shared practices. So there's a building of relationship, a building of culture, and a building of momentum to see the good news of Jesus impacting a people group or a place. And so they would be the marks of movement. And there is no, as we said, there's no sort of movement school or quick fix or plug and play solution to get movement. You don't kind of put, it's not like a recipe where you put all these things in. They really are marks that we're really praying for and positioning ourselves to partner with God at work. And so in CREO, we're seeking to spark those movements through Christian entrepreneurs. And then in the Movement Leaders Collective, really trying to create a collaborative environment for people who've been courageous enough and daft enough to dream those visions and to step out into them. So we've seen some incredible kingdom movements. So some movements in the context of the UK, where there is movements within the context within refugees, so those that are coming and seeking asylum and refugee status. And so there would be ministry to them, but far more than that, actually the equipping. And so in terms of some of the areas of employment, small business, care, so churches mobilized, but also this co-creation of those within that world themselves being able to lead in context. Doing some work in Asia. So again, being able to come alongside some wonderful Christian entrepreneurs. And again, even pre-COVID, there was some wonderful work going on in the context of community empowerment. And in the last 12 months and the last 12 weeks, just incredible sacrificial love in the context of huge disruption and pain. And so, and I could go on. The one of the privileges I have is just to be able to cheer on and encourage some incredible leaders. So I think one thing I would say, the joy of kingdom movement is that often we can name it by looking backwards rather than by speaking of the status quo. So I would believe that there are some leaders that I know who you wouldn't know the name of, and they wouldn't want you to know the name of, and they would go after me if I mentioned their name right now on here. But they're the heroes, like your wife, who are faithfully putting one foot in front of the other, and I know God is using them. But what I see is they are positioning not to have a ministry that is their influence, but they are investing in leaders who invest in leaders who invest in leaders. And there really is that sense of movement being self-replicating and self-generating. So it's actually generating and replicating itself, quite self-organizing as well. And that's, talk about the messy middle, that's the messy edge. And so movements obviously and almost always look on the edge of order and chaos and this sort of, I think it's working, is it? No, it's not. And so that's the joy. I think most kingdom movements I see look both deeply significant and feel they have a resonance of significance, but they also have a vulnerability of, is this really it, and is it working, and slightly chaotic. So that's the mark of this sort of resonance and depth and solidity, but chaos and creativity. And when you feel the mix of those two, that's when you know there's something movemental in the mix.
Yeah, and it sounds like, as leaders are influencing leaders or influencing leaders and others, and you creating this movement on the outside, if you're looking at something in that chaos and you're looking, there's all sorts of things happening, and it looks exciting, and it looks like, well, I want to be a part of this. This is really an amazing thing. But on the inside, it actually seems really mundane, and it's like the hard work of apprenticing people, of being with others, as they're taking 2 steps forward, 1 step back. They're, we're discipling into the hard places of their marriage and their work life, their life with Jesus. How do we as leaders walk that out and know that movements are often mundane, but if we set things up in the right way, we're going to see large scale change on the other end?
Well, let's have that conversation in 20 years, Joshua, and we'll see whether this answer right now holds the test of time. I think it has to be it has to be both, and this is a paradoxical answer.
Yeah.
In my opinion, it has to be both about you and Jesus, Jesus and you, and it has to always be about other people. And so they're sort of slightly contradictory, paradoxical. But what I mean by it is that if I'm not ministering from the overflow, if my leadership isn't undergirded by my discipleship, if what I'm sharing with others, I'm not wrestling with myself, if it's not sort of testimony, it's merely tactics, then that grows cold, that grows old, that can go quite quickly. So I think in one sense, how do you keep going? You walk faithfully with Jesus as a disciple. That's the sort of lowest common denominator. The kind of core unit DNA is you stay in love with Jesus. You continue to allow him to woo you, and you pursue him. So that's one side, I think. And then the flip side is you always seek to lose your life for Jesus and the good of others. So the call to discipleship is to deny yourself, pick up your cross, and follow me. And that is that sense of I lose my life and I find it. And so how do you continue to give your life away and lose your life for Jesus, lose your life for others? And so that for me comes to the question of I would probably say, if you pushed me, that actually faithfulness is the goal, and movement is a byproduct. If we're faithful, that the outcomes of whether it's one person or 10,000 people, it's actually God's domain, not our domain. And the minute I start to measure or pursue a quantity or a whatever that be, I think we've probably fallen at the first hurdle in terms of actually this is about faithfulness and about an authentic expression of who you are as a disciple. And then that's extended into any and all influence that you may have and may be given. And there's a wonderful covenant prayer from the Methodists. So I have a Methodist tradition, and the Wesley prayer talks about being lifted high for you or laid aside for you, and I freely yield all things unto. And there's just this sense of, and it's Paul's words of full or empty. It's just this sense of whatever is going on, I want to be faithful and I want to be close to you, Jesus, and I want to be known by you and make you known. And so, I think they'd be my sort of, how do you keep going in the mundane? You follow Jesus, you walk with him faithfully, and you encourage others to do the same.
Wow, that's good. Well, I see, in your life of giving over to Christian leaders that you're a modern day circuit rider. So you're getting on your horse, going to one little group and pouring in, then going to the next one. You're being a good circuit rider. So you're a good Methodist in the middle of it. Just a couple of questions as we end this that I like to end with. One, if you look back on your life and what you know now, what advice would you give your 21-year-old self?
Oh, good question. I would probably give it the same as I'm hoping my 60-year-old self gives it, which is stay close to Jesus. I think there is so much distraction, noise, temptation, drift in the world. Just stay close to Jesus would be number one. And number two would be enjoy the moment. So I am sort of, again, Myers-Briggs, Strength Finders, Enneagram, all of these things, and Myers like fivefold. I'm a sort of strategist, futurist, innovator, like just new people, new frontiers, new opportunities. And so one of my greatest strengths, which are all of that list, are there. That's also my greatest weakness. So I can go too fast, go too hard, go too far, miss the moment, be too intense. So I know those things now at 40, and I have prayer and counseling and accountability and community and wonderful people that love me and kind of ground me and challenge me and shake, not the edges off and shake me. But probably at 21, it was just this sort of ball of energy. And lots of that was good, but there's probably like a kind of giant Great Dane or Labrador running around the house. So I think I just kind of go, just calm down, enjoy the moment, love Jesus. It'll all come together. That kind of piece.
That's good. And then just last, is there anything that you've been watching or reading that you would recommend?
Oh, I think I love to read books that stretch me in terms of my thinking. So I've loved Collective Genius, which is around a collective intelligence. New Power, which is around relational influence. The Beautiful Constraint, which is about the challenge and opportunity of constraints, which again for me, given my 21-year-old self, is really helpful. And then I've consistently come back to strengthening strengthening the soul of your leadership, and just that sense of how do I continue to live well. My energy is always to the frontier and to innovation and to new, and actually that sense of depth. And so reading the classics of Peterson and Willard just ground me, and now some of the more modern day classics like that, those are true to me and for me to really ground me. So but there's lots more I could do, but probably there are a few.
That's great. Well, Rich, thank you so much for being on today. I really appreciate it. It was a great conversation, and I think it spurred a lot of people on into greater things. So thanks, Rich.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for listening to the show today. If you're really enjoying the show, please don't forget to hit the follow button on your favorite podcast app. You could do it right now. Just hit that little plus. And then I would love it if you would leave a rating and review on Apple Podcasts. So you could go right now to the show and leave a star rating and review and let us know how you are enjoying the show. And find us on Facebook and Instagram. So if you want to connect, interact, I post a lot of quotes and different things that you could actually interact with the episodes and let me know how you are enjoying the show. If you feel inclined to donate, there is a support the show link in the show notes, and it would send you directly to a page where you could donate so that new episodes can be produced for your enjoyment. So thank you so much for listening, and I hope you have an incredible week.